20 years ago, the original Resident Evil 2 was released, becoming one of the greatest Resident Evil titles of all time. But the video game wasn't the only great thing we received that year based on the RE series, as Wildstorm Comics released the first official comic book magazine based on the Resident Evil video game. The first volume was released in March of 1998, 2 months after the release of Resident Evil 2. You may have already heard of the comic book side stories, as I've covered most of them, but there's one particular story that was not present in the first or second volume of the Wildstorm comics. In their website, Wildstorm Comics allowed fans of the Resident Evil comic book to explore a story that would be revealed 1 image per week, in a total of 15 images. And once the final image is revealed, they'd release a front cover for that webcomic, and the reader would then print out every image and staple them with the front cover released in the comic. Unfortunately, Wildstorm Comics became a publishing imprint of DC Comics in 1999, a year after the second volume was released. And with drastic changes, the website no longer contained the exclusive webcomic images that were once featured on their website. I've tried the Wayback Internet Archive machine, but it doesn't have anything available for 1998, 99, or 2000. They still continue to make Resident Evil comics like the Fire and Ice series that I haven't covered yet, but knowing this means that they still had permission to use the Resident Evil name even after being an imprint of DC Comics. So it looks like somewhere down the line they took it down and viewers forgot about it over time. The problem here is that we officially don't have a way of tracking it down through the internet. See, with the Biohazard manhwas, you can buy them online if you can track them down. Same goes for the mangas and Wildstorm Comics. You can even view them online, but the webcomics were exclusive images for the Wildstorm website. So the only way to actually get a hold of the webcomic is if someone actually did as they were instructed in the comic and print out the images before they became lost on the internet. But here's where we get a bit of good and bad news. Because back when these exclusive images were released, when I was in high school, I actually copied them on a floppy disk and printed them at home. Problem is that I've had to look through piles of binders and folders containing my printed images and drawings, and the bad news is that I only found a couple printed images, but they were the very first versions that I printed out, which were not in color. The good news though is that after searching again for countless hours, I found one link where someone did in fact print them out as well, and end up scanning them online. So let's take a quick look at the 15 images that have become lost online. The webcomic of Resident Evil 1 starts off with the Alpha team already inside the Spencer mansion. However, the team only consists of Chris, Jill, and Wesker. Barry does not appear in the comic, nor does Rebecca Chambers. In the second image, we see that Chris alone discovers the body of Kenneth Sullivan, already devoured by the first zombie Chris encounters. And in this version, Chris does have a gun with him already, so he quickly takes it down. The next image is based on the surprise encounter with the Cerberus that breaks through the window in the first floor east side hallway. The fourth has Chris taking on the giant snake known as Yawn, which looks like a fantastic shot. You can tell that it's the area where you first fight against Yawn. The fifth image shows Chris taking on the giant spiders. This is the image that helped me remember that this webcomic even existed. It's a really cool shot seeing Chris facing off against multiple giant spiders with a shotgun. The sixth image has Chris facing off against a BOW hunter, but its color palette is brown instead of green. Chris also mentions that not only can he not find Jill or Wesker, but now all the zombies that he's killed have turned into these things. In the seventh image, Chris has finally found Jill Valentine in the cell where Wesker locked her in. She explains to Chris that Wesker did this to her and that he's in one of the labs at the facility they're in. In the eighth image, Chris and Wesker are observing the Tyrant, as Wesker explains to Chris how these tyrants will become super soldiers and that no army in the world will be able to stop them. Suddenly its left arm starts to move, and once Wesker notices this, in the next image we see that the Tyrant impales Wesker as he does in the game, and Chris mentions that there is a little justice in the world after all. Chris uses the shotgun to hold back the Tyrant, and he mentions that it took him over a dozen shotgun shells to take down the Tyrant. He then uses the computer in that room to unlock the door to Jill's cell, and he also activates the self-destruct sequence. He rescues Jill, they both reach the helipad, but as expected, they are greeted by the Tyrant who breaks through the floor, but by the next picture, Chris already has the rocket launcher at his possession, and he fires a rocket, killing the Tyrant. And with the last image we see that the mansion goes up in flames, and both Chris and Jill managed to escape the mansion alive. Even though this version does not include Barry Burton or Rebecca Chambers, it still fits the flow of the story, seeing as there are multiple endings where certain STARS members don't make it out alive. So in the end, this summarized version of Resident Evil 1 is worth checking out. And that's how this webcomic ends. As you can see, Ted Adams, the story writer for most of the side stories in the first volume of the Resident Evil comics, worked on this webcomic as well. It doesn't connect with the story in the first issue, so it's more like its own side story, like a typical playthrough. But it was quite interesting to see these epic encounters in a different shot. It's like I mentioned earlier, the only reason why I remembered this lost webcomic was because I vaguely remember the shot of Chris fighting against the giant spiders. So I went through the comics, but I couldn't find that image anywhere. And that's when I started searching for this webcomic that was never released, as they expected the fans to print each picture out every time a new image was released per week. But after digging through forums, I ran into a few discussions regarding the webcomics, and it looks like there was information regarding a second webcomic that was going to be released after the first one ended. But it doesn't look like anyone posted up any pictures of the second webcomic. Fortunately, this is where my collection does come in handy. After continuing my search for my colored printouts, this is where it hit me. I remember that the RE1 webcomic wasn't the only comic I printed out, aside from the first printouts that were black and white images. I actually printed out the second webcomic that was featured on their website, but I couldn't remember any specific images that aren't in the comic book volumes to help paint a better picture. But luckily, by the time I was about to finish this video, I actually found the second webcomic that I printed out. So seeing as I added this last minute info at the end of the video, you now have an idea of what the next video is going to be about. Next time, we'll take a look at the second webcomic that is lost to the internet, and it's based on Resident Evil 2. And with that said, that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if so, be sure to leave a like, share with others, and subscribe if you haven't. And if you'd like to see some extra content, or you'd like to see your name at the end of the videos, then feel free to support the channel by donating a single dollar to my Patreon. There are also additional perks for donating more than $1. The link is on the description, along with the link to my Facebook page, Tumblr, DeviantArt, and Twitter. But anyways, I'll see you all in the next video, and remember to have an awesome day.